technology problems, as is the way nowadays. So Connie, I sent Connie the wrong link, and she's going to be on in just a minute. Right now, with me, we have Chris and Bonnie. They are both amazing people that we've connected to through the podcast. We have yet to release Chris's episode that we recorded with him. Bonnie, if you've been following us, is the wife of Rajiv. I'm worried I'll butcher the last name, so I'm going to stay away from it. But
it's Rambob. It's easy.
Rambob. Okay, it looks like it might be harder than
right.
But perfect. They're both, amazing people, and we're really excited to be talking to them. I think to start, just want to let everybody know that we have an option where you can ask questions throughout this event to any of the panelists or myself. Allison is also going to be on in the chat room to help answer or kind of help people with things. And also just a quick note that Chris will be leaving in an hour, and then we'll still be going on after that. So if you have any questions for Chris, especially about something related to Scientology, try to get those questions in early so that way he can answer those before he goes. That'd be awesome. But I think to start, it would be great to go to our guests and hear kind of a little bit about their story and kind of why they're on today. If we could start with Bonnie, I would love to hear from you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I'm fourth generation Seventh-day Adventist on both sides of my family. So my family heritage goes back almost to the very beginning of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Grew up not just in the church system, but also the school system. I attended Seventh-day Adventist schools all the way through college, and then became a teacher in the educational system. So I got married right out of college. I did all the things you're supposed to, get married, start having kids, work for the church, follow all the laws, the rules, all that. And then right about 33, 34, 35 years old, some of those questions that I kept pushing down, began to get too big. And I lost it all. Like the deconstruction process for me was more like just a complete demolition, smash. As soon as one little thread went, it all did. And yeah, sunk into a pretty deep depression. And I describe it as like metamorphosis because I feel very different at the other end of it than I did going in to this deconstruction process. But since then, I am actually, believe it or not, never would have imagined now working as a Christian minister in the United Church of Christ. So that's a little bit of my story.
Perfect. Thank you. I feel like that's like the perfect little snippet. Really excited to kind of get your perspective too of where you're at now and that kind of crazy. Like I think most of us when we leave a religion would never expect to be working as a Christian in the Christian ministry. So really excited to dive into that. Also with us is Chris. Would love to hear a bit of your story that would give some people some background.
Sure. Yeah, just real fast. 27 years professionally working, involved with the Church of Scientology. That's actually counting it from age 15. I was actually raised in it though, so it's longer than that. But that was as long as I was really buying into the dogma. And 27 years is a good long time to get indoctrinated into L. Ron Hubbard's teachings. So I was all the way in. I went all the way in terms of jobs and working for the church. I was 24/7 in what was called the C organization, which is kind of the core Vatican kind of group of Scientology, if you think about it that way. And then I left in 2013 was my year of deconversion, I guess you could say. Going down the internet rabbit hole. I stopped working for the church and then went down the internet rabbit hole and then kind of got my head cleared and discovered critical thinking and started a YouTube channel and been talking about it ever since. And so that's been my experience. And I definitely have a lot to say about, deconstructing or reconstructing or reconfiguring or whatever word you want to use to describe sorting out the process of leaving an extremist, hardcore belief set and then being left with nothing. And now what do you do? And that's a question we all answer in our own ways. And and looking for advice and stuff, I think we mutually will provide some. We'll see how this goes. This will be interesting.
Thank you so much, Chris. And also for everybody watching, Chris is such an amazing resource for Scientology. He has a ton of videos. We'll make sure that everybody can have access to finding his YouTube channel. It's a great place to learn. And I'm so glad that we have Connie on. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties that I just provided you over the past few minutes.
No worries. I'm happy to be here.
We would love to. We're just starting off with the kind of sharing a bit about ourselves, giving people a little bit of background. Could you kind of share your background and experience in deconstruction, reconstruction?
You bet. I'd be happy to. And the funny thing is I've been listening to you guys since about 10 minutes till. So I've heard everything that's gone on, which is wonderful. So I would love to hop in now. Yes, my name is Connie, and my story in short is I was raised in a very fundamentalist evangelical sort of church and kind of became a rising star, so to speak, went to Bible school. And then when I was 25 years old, I was headed to the mission field. And when I was 25 years old, I was sexually abused by the pastor of my church and for 9 months. And then when things came out and it was revealed what was happening, it was framed as an emotional affair, and I was blamed for it, and then publicly had to get up in front of 2 services to confess my sin, and then was asked to leave the church. So it was a hellish nightmare that took me about a decade to recover from. And so part of why I put out, I mean, I'm listening, to Bonnie and Chris, and part of why we do what we do is because of our story. We don't want other people to have to go through what we've been through. And so I became a therapist and, wrote a book and did the thing. And I wrote the book saying, this is the book I desperately needed. I could have been back on my feet in maybe 2 to 5 years rather than 10 if I would have had some orientation and some awareness of what religious trauma was. So that's my story.
Cool.
That is awful. And I think that is such a thing of having to go through those awful things to make that progress I wish less people did.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that with us.
You bet.
I think to start, I kind of want to throw a question out to you guys of when we get out of this scenario that we've grown up in, that does not fit us, we've gone through such hard things, the first thing I feel like that's on the mind, because you lose everything, is survive. How do I survive? How do I pay for my meals, pay for a house, and everything? And those practical tips, I think, are one of the hardest things. And so I'd love to hear from each of you, kind of your top tips, your field guide to surviving, surviving the whole ordeal, and how you kind of, wade your way through. Connie, also, since you're a specialist you're a therapist, and I know you've helped so many people in this topic, and I've been meaning to reach out to you myself, and I've been about anyways, would you like to start us off with this question? I'd love to hear from you.
How do I survive?
Yeah, just that kind of especially for people who are early out of their religion.
First steps.
Yeah, first steps. Well, I think part of the challenge of survival at this point is we're usually leaving our 90 to 100% of our support system and socially. And when we leave our support system socially, that means we don't have financial safety nets. That means we When you ask the question, how do you pay the rent or put food on the table? And I'm like, yeah, especially if you were in something like Sea Org, or where you're doing full-time work at the church, and your income is dependent on the place that you're leaving. It's a big deal. Creativity. You got to start getting creative, because you're not going to be able to do what you did before. In a lot of times, you're going to have to. And I heard a little bit of your story, Bonnie, and kind of coming back to the church in a really different capacity, and I connect with that. But a lot of times there's a big gap. You don't just hop from one to the other. There's a long process. So I just think, there's a lot of challenges to survival, but we're here, here, all four of us, and including Allison, 5 of us, we're here. So we did survive it. I think a lot of creativity. You've got to start finding, to me, immediately, I think, a social support. You just got to start figuring out who's around me that gets this even a little, who's around me. I would tell my story to people when I left and 300 miles away, and they'd be horrified. And I'd be like, was it that bad? And they're like, oh my gosh, it's horrible. I'm like, well, I was so messed up at the time. So I needed social people around me. That's probably one of the biggest things I'd say, is to say who, and there again, we're talking in the middle of a pandemic right now, you guys. And so deconstructing and intersecting with a pandemic, there's reasons it's brutal. There's reasons it's really brutally hard. It's hard on a good day in the world to leave this. And then you've got the pandemic and all this relational, social pain and political strife happening that's ripping stuff, the fabric. So you're in a tough situation. You're going to make it, but it's hard. And who is it? And sometimes it's really interesting, different sort of people that we never thought we'd be friends with in our old life. Like, what? I can actually be this person's friend and really feel good about, oh my gosh, I like them. I wouldn't have liked them before, and to be creative and open to what are those supports that I can draw from. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Give me a minute to, ruminate a little bit, but I'd love to hear from the other people as well.
Totally. Thank you so much. I know that community is huge. Chris?
Yeah, I say right from the get-go that the very, very, very first things that must be taken care of are, food, your 3 basics, right? You got to have a source of food, or you have to have a source of transportation or getting around, and you got to have a place to sleep. And those are your immediate necessities in coming out of a situation like that. And you're going to have to use the context of your life is going to determine how that's going to go. Because it could be anything from a homeless shelter at it's sort of one of the worst case scenarios where you literally have nowhere else to go, to maybe finding family, extended family. There's usually responsibilities and obligations there. And if you've maintained any kind of line with them, communication with them, then maybe there's a possibility they'd help you out. There's many, many other levels of support services. What I didn't know coming out was how many there are. And how much help is available to people, from the charity of private churches to government, funded programs. There are lots, and if you get down to a government office or you get on the web at all, you can find these resources. But just knowing they're there to find is the first thing to know, because it's not obvious. They're not necessarily advertising themselves, on posters on walls. You're going to be walking past on the street or whatever. So you got to go find and dig them up, but they're there. And I found there's a lot of help out there for people but they have to make themselves known and go out and find it. There's that kind of work that has to be done.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, because it does feel like when you get out, I think it feels like nobody else has gone through this.
Well, that's the thing. That's very much the thing, is you feel very alone. You feel very much like this is unique to you. You were personally victimized. Look at this stuff that happened to me. My life is over. It's ruined. I've lost everything. And it's totally understandable why somebody would think all of those things. But the fact of the matter is that very rarely are all of those things actually true. There is life after this, and there is a social network to rebuild, and there is a life to rebuild, and it's a process, but it's doable, and it's something people need to know right away. That there is something else you can do with your life now.
Definitely. And I think to a point with that, kind of with yours and Connie's a little bit, is that I think people also do, there's certain people that can't really take, I think, what we've gone through, especially when we're raw in it. But people will find it interesting, and almost can draw some like pretty interesting people that, for me, I've been able to learn so much from some people because they also find my story interesting. And so I get to hear these other people's stories, and that can be a really great way to start some community, is kind of being open about what you've gone through, and it will kind of gravitate some really interesting people that you'll be able to, maybe some positive and negative experiences, but experiences nonetheless. I'd love to hear too from you, Bonnie, from your experience.
Yeah, I think that question of survival often keeps people staying put longer than they know they should. I guess is I know it certainly did for me. And to add to all of what has already been said, because I second everything that has already been said, I would say a key to surviving is beginning that process of trusting yourself.
Oh.
Because for so many of us, for all of us who are going through this process of deconstruction and then reconstruction, on and on and on, we have been taught to distrust our voice, our inner voice that tells us what to do, tells us the next step forward. And so beginning that process of like, where is that voice? It doesn't have to come from outside somewhere or from, some other authority. I can find that authority within me to know what the next step is. And it seems like once, for me anyway, I don't know what it was like for the other folks up here, but for me anyway, once I kind of found that voice, it just seems so much less scary, because I knew I would have that guidance, inner guidance, to know the next step.
Yeah, that is an amazing point. Yeah, that is really true. I think that's part of the hardship is we get so, we're like not used to listening to that voice.
Right.
If we come from a place that's so loud and like, oh yeah, listen to this, and then you're just left with yourself. It's like, what do I do with it? I'm curious for you two, Chris and Connie. I'm gonna try not to mix up Bonnie and Connie as well as I can.
It's okay.
For you two, what was that experience like? Kind of listening and like finding your own voice. Like, how did that feel?
Well, for me. I'll say it was difficult. There's a lie connected with, or this sort of thing connected with a lot of the groups that we've come out of, or that we're referring to when we talk about extremist groups, or deeply held, dogmatic religious belief. Is there's this idea that it's building you up, but really what it does is it builds up the group. And it makes the group everything, and it makes you kind of nothing if you're not part of the group. That's always the conditional. It's always conditional. And so when you break away, you are now adrift, right? Like Bonnie was saying. And it's a feeling of powerlessness, of uncertainty, great deal of uncertainty. And the biggest move forward for me, and it took a while, it was not a day one sort of thing, but just speaking to the point, was sort of embracing that uncertainty and realizing that I'm not in control of all the factors of my life. No one is. And any group that's pretending that they are is just pretending. And that's not going to change, and that actually, uncertainty and change and randomness and the who knows what's going to come today are good things. They can be they can be framed in a very evil way, in a very bad way, but you can also frame them in a good way. You can look at it and go, yeah, I'm going to wake up today and I got a plan, but let's see what happens, and that's okay. And there's and I think, at least for me and the group I was a part of, control was a really big deal. Being in control of your life and your thoughts, your emotions, your ideas. This was very, very important to me, and it was a group ideal. And I had to learn that was a control mechanism. It wasn't control. And that real control is recognizing that there are limitations and that it's okay. And I harp on that because it was a really big deal for me.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, it really does tie into this whole inner voice. I love these comments over here from Joanna and Carrie. I'm like, yes, you guys get how this is a process. It's not, you're not going to wake up one day and go, oh, there's my strong inner voice that I'm really clear on. Good, let's go now. Now I've changed. It doesn't work like that. It's a muscle. It's a muscle that has to be exercised. It's been atrophied. And man, this whole thing, Joanna's thing about, don't trust yourself, your voice, it's subject to God's voice. And those of us who were raised in the church, the heart's deceitful above all things, desperately wicked, so you can't trust yourself. All these things that we get told, that muscle atrophies. It is just, a lot of times it's just gone. It's like, all right, authority out there, tell me who I should be. What should I do? And so be patient with yourself. You've got to figure out how to move that muscle, let alone lift weights with it. You've got to figure out how to even, is this a thing? Is this okay, I can move my arm now. And then, wait, I could lift 2 pounds, and so it takes time and exercise to say, what do I want? I always say the big identity questions are, what do I want? What do I need? How do I feel? And from that, especially in my body, what's happening in my body? And then to say, I can trust that's giving me really concrete, good information. And then to go, all right, with that, what do I want to do? And then to watch, you're not going to bat 1,000. Nobody does. There are times when I go, yeah, I trusted that inner voice of mine. Yeah, well, that wasn't probably the best thing, but all right, But most of the time, there's a sense of a basic direction where you're not going to go a crazy way. To be able to hear yourself and ask those questions, of what you want, need, how you feel, what your experience is, and then to move with that gets that muscle strengthening. So it's just going to take time. So yeah, it takes time and practice to hear it, even hear our own voices, let alone honor them and do something about them. So
most definitely. I love that like illustration of physical therapy. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to lift like 2 pounds right now. That's all I can take.
Right.
I think that's so true.
And I think it gives us some self-compassion to say, I can't lift 20 pounders yet. I'm just still learning this skill. I can't expect myself to, and to be gentle with that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, especially the word uncertainty too, remind me of is the concept of chaos and order, and kind of getting used to that was like a huge deal because I think we are taught oftentimes that order is what matters. Is everything has to be order.
That's right.
And that's just unrealistic. Have you what's the right way to say it? Have any of you experienced the especially in the early days of like you're so things will happen and it's like, oh, like I have no idea how to take care of this, and then afterwards you're like, I'm kind of glad it happened like that because then I've learned something. Like kind of enjoying that chaos, I'm curious if any of you have any experiences that you can think of, because I think that, for me, looking back on,
Well, this might sound a little out of left field, but I was part of a group that was very work oriented. I worked all the time, and so for me, it was a new skill to learn how to relax. Literally, I couldn't do it for about 2 years. I couldn't do it at all. Like I couldn't sit still for longer than 5 minutes without starting to feel guilty that I wasn't up working or doing something productive, right, with my time, because we only have so much time, right? So got to make most use of it. And it was pretty
Chris, I love that you've learned it.
It took a long time. It did.
I'm still working. Yeah. Well, I think part of what I like, Chris, about what you said, you know, connecting to Ashton's idea is rest can feel like chaos. Rest can feel very chaotic when we are scripted to work and to high levels of productivity and contribution constantly, and to kind of live with that chaos a little bit. And I think chaos shows itself in a lot of different ways. And I think that's a good example of saying, wait, I know rest is good for me, but it doesn't feel, it's uncomfortable. And to learn those new skills, whatever the chaos is that we're facing, be it rest or confusion about our faith or whatever. That was the first thing that came to mind with chaos. Is I had two conservative Bible degrees under my belt, you know, a graduate, you know, undergrad and a graduate degree, where I wrote thorough doctrinal statements. You want to talk about order, bam, 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 you know. And this was, you know, you're writing about stuff that nobody, probably including God, doesn't care about. Okay, nobody, don't tell anybody I said that. Anyway, you're writing stuff in these doctrinal statements that's like whatever. And so to actually let go of all that feels incredibly chaotic. And to go, now I just don't know what I think or feel or know or anything.
Right.
And that's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the whole ground shakes, right? And to be comfortable with the shaking ground is a whole journey. Because I think that is part of the process, is to learn to become comfortable, or at least to be able to tolerate the ground shaking a bit, which is, I think, what you were talking about, Chris, when you were speaking about certainty and uncertainty. Because there's only so much we can know in this life. And we've been told that we can know everything, capital T truth, right?
That's right.
So it feels like chaos when we begin to question that.
Yeah.
Big time. And you know, another point on this that's probably ties right in with it is the time factor too, because I felt, because of the lifestyle I had led and the schedule and everything about it, that I was always kind of frantic with my time, and that created this anxiety of not having enough time, always thinking I don't have enough time. And the fact of the matter is that after coming out of a situation like this, it's gonna take time to reset everything and figure things out. There's no substitute for experience. And there's no way to rush it. I've tried so many times, and you can't do it. You got to go through what you got to go through, because your emotion, you know, your intellect might be telling you one thing about your recovery, but your emotions are going to tell you other things, and they're both equally you. So it's not a matter of you're being too emotional, you're being tough, or whatever the phraseology is from your former group, telling you why it is you can't have emotions or why you can't have individual real thoughts, because, you know, there are mechanisms for both of those things. But it's you know, you can just kind of eschew all that. You got to get rid of all that crap and realize that you got a lot of time ahead of you, and there's time to sort this stuff out. You don't have to do it all in a day or two.
Yeah,
doesn't work that way.
Right. And
You
that's that
can't.
self-compassion, right? Which you
Yeah.
were talking about, Connie. Yes. Patience with oneself is also a muscle. And
Yes, it is.
requires that little tiny lifts and then eventually work up to those larger weights, because it's hard, I think, to go through this process if you're feeling guilty, if you're sort of hating yourself all the time, if you're not sure if this is the path you're supposed to be on. And I have been there in every single one of those places. So I know that we feel that way. We feel guilty. We feel like something's wrong with us. We feel all these ways. And it makes it hard. It makes it really hard. So self-compassion is huge. I'm so glad you brought that up, Connie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It takes a while for some of this stuff to settle in too. You know, and that's another reason why this is a real basic beginning point is just have patience with yourself. Just give yourself a break. You know, you come out of a situation that was probably pretty bad, pretty dominating, you know, and it's going to take a while to fix everything.
Yeah, definitely. I think I mean, I've almost gotten to. I think it gets to the point that you get used to, like, you start feeling a tremor. You know, you start feeling the ground start to shake. You know, like you gotta get used to it. You prep yourself, and then it becomes a, like, well, it's gonna be hard, but also I'm gonna grow from it, and like I'm gonna learn, and like that. That's in a way, even though it's gonna be hard, is like you can kind of look forward to it in that sense, which is I'm still trying to get used to. But slowly but surely, it gets more and more. There's almost like, well, you know, something good will come out of it. Yeah. Because it does, we do move on, which is exciting. Yeah.
And you learn to trust that. Like, okay, you watch it cycle a few times. Oh, that was horrible. But something really productive and beautiful came out of that. Oh, well, that's odd. Okay, you know, and yeah, you learn to trust in a really different way than the way you were scripted to before.
Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. I wanted to. We have a little less than 30 minutes left with Chris, so I want to get to some questions while Chris is still here, and then also discuss, because I know Connie and Bonnie both have experience, a lot of experience being back in religion. So at that point, we can kind of discuss the reconstruction of faith too. But for now, I'd love to get to some questions. Because we've got some really good ones so far. One with 2 votes. Do you still have family and or close friends in the faith that you left? And how did you or do you navigate those relationships?
Oh, such a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, family. My parents were involved, obviously, because that's how I got involved. They raised me in Scientology. They got out before I did. But my dad still maintains the belief set. He just doesn't get along with the organization because it's a, you know, destructive cult. So of course, you know, they're going to alienate some people, and my parents are a couple of those people. So they got out before I did. They were very much helpful to me, and when I got out, they were my support system. But it has been difficult interacting, you know, with someone who still has that belief set when I absolutely do not. I've given up every single thing about my, you know, Scientology beliefs as far as the whole dogma of it goes and the spirituality of it goes. So we just kind of agree to disagree and don't talk about it. And I'm okay with that, you know, because I love my dad. And I think my dad's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I get along with him great. So I didn't see for my end any reason why I needed to change his mind. At first, I was very concerned, but then I kind of realized he's living his life. He's retired. He's fine. He's not giving money to the church. He's not buying their crap. He's not involved that way. So why do I care what thoughts are going on in his head when he and I are having a perfectly wonderful relationship without having to, you know, throw the dead fish on the table every time we talk? And that's worked. I'm not saying it works for everybody, but it's been difficult, but workable for me.
Chris,
So
is
that's
part of the reason, I have a question, is part of the reason it's worked between you and your dad is because he's not pressuring you toward his belief structure?
correct. He does not try to proselytize to me either. I mean, he and I both know exactly what all this is about now and how it has been used destructively by a group of people in a cult. So he gets that.
Yeah.
But he still has this belief set in the spirituality of it. And I don't. So I'm not gonna, but I guess where I was going is I'm not gonna argue with him about it. Why?
Mm-hmm.
If his beliefs informed action that was destructive, it would be a different conversation. But I want to stress he's not doing anything destructive. So
Yeah. Do either of you have thank you, Chris. That is very valuable insights. I appreciate that. Do either of you, Connie or Bonnie, have friends or family that are still back in the old faith that you have?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Connie.
Well, I'm just sitting there thinking, how do I boil this down? I
Right.
actually have all kinds of people still in that faith system that are actually still really important to me. And to me, it's a really individual thing. I've got my mom, one of my best friends would still identify as evangelical. Back when I talked to 3 or 4 best friends in the world, would still identify. What makes this workable? Let's take her. My mom and me, it's a little bit like Chris's truce. She doesn't get why I think the way I do, but we love each other, and she's respectful of me. And she doesn't push me, because that would be like, all right, I'm pulling away further. Yep. She doesn't push me. She's respectful. She doesn't always agree with me. So that ends up being, and by the way, I'm thinking of all you people listening, you're thinking, wow, that must be nice. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It is. I feel very, very fortunate to have that. Because I know I work with people I have friends, and I work with people all the time who don't have that. What it boils down to for me is I actually have quite a high degree of flexibility relationally. It's probably why I'm a therapist. I can get along with a lot of people, see a lot of different perspectives. And so if they can be respectful of where I'm at, and if they can honor me, not agree with me, but honor me, I have a pretty huge span of the closest people in my life and where they stand spiritually and otherwise, spiritually and politically. I mean, I got quite a spectrum going on, and so a lot of it just boils down to, does this relationship hurt me? And there have been some friends I have absolutely distanced myself from, because not interested, don't want to hear it, don't want to hear you try to get me back in the fold or whatever. No, absolutely not. Now, it's ruptured some friendships that have been difficult. But a lot of it has been, there's so much complexity to this question. It's such a great question. I'm going to leave that there for right now. If they're willing to honor me and my journey and respect it, I'm willing to have a conversation and keep relationship with people. So
yeah, I've been fortunate too, where I haven't had to cut off some of those primary relationships, though there have been rocky periods and difficult periods. But I think it does come down to, can you negotiate new terms of respect?
Yeah.
And if you can, then in some ways, I think the relationship is like, it's worth preserving, because every one of us is on a journey, and we all sort of see things differently. We experience things differently, and we relate to the context, even that really what I would describe as a very confining, restrictive, controlling context. I've seen other people actually describe it as life-giving and liberating. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. However, if that's where they're coming from, then I suppose if I want them to respect where I'm coming from, it would be okay to respect where they're coming from. So I think, yeah, if you can negotiate terms of respect, and if the terms are based on this condition that you have to belong to this group, you have to think this way, you have to follow these whatever, then it's not really a relationship. Then it becomes really fraught. So yes, it's complex, and I think there's struggle if the relationships are honest. And I know for me, with family members and friends, I've asked the question, like, can you still respect me?
Yeah.
Just that question. And if the answer is yes, then I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. And let's figure out how we can continue to be on this journey together, the journey of life together.
Thank you so much, you guys. Joanna, thank you so much for that question. That is a really good one.
Yeah, great question.
I don't want to like rush out of it, but this one I know is huge. This question, because I know from our community and from some of our polls and stuff, this is a huge topic. And so I definitely want to get to this before Chris leaves. But it is, what are some of your tips for reconstructing your identity after leaving faith? I enjoy the community with those who have gone through the same experiences, but I'd like not to have my past faith anchor me down. And that is one of the biggest challenges. I'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, for me, it's a constant struggle. I had an identity very, very strictly defined as a Scientologist. I knew exactly what I was, who I was, what I was doing, where I had been for the last 20 trillion years, and where I expected to be a billion years from now. I mean, I really thought I had all of this really figured out. So it was with some degree of surprise that I learned L. Ron Hubbard was a pathological liar, and nothing that he ever said something I could take for as true. And that ripped everything out from under me. So there was nothing at all. It was just a big void, and that was really uncomfortable, to put it lightly. It was devastating. It was heartbreaking. It was maddening. It was insane making. It was everything. It was all of it. Every emotion connected with it was quite strong. I lucked into an anchor that I could hold on to that was not just another cult. And I say lucky because it was luck that I happened to do a Google search to find out, how do I not fall for bullshit? Pardon my French, but that's literally what I Googled. How do I not fall for bullshit, right? Because I didn't want to go from one belief set that consumed my life and literally made me believe that I was saving the world for decades. With my every action, with everything I was doing, that's what I was doing, is I was saving the world. Well, that was arrogant in the extreme. And I didn't want to ever fall into that again. I didn't want to ever can be consumed by a belief set. So my Google search found Carl Sagan and critical thinking, and skeptic.com and James Randi and the whole concept of critical thinking. And I only stress it because for me as a Scientologist, and I'm sure for other groups, critical thinking is a bad word. It's bad. It's harmful. Critical thinking is the tool of the devil. I mean, I've seen that on churches. I mean, that's pretty wild thinking. And so the thing that has helped me rebuild everything, and addressing your question here, because I'm trying to get back to that, is critical thinking is the anchor that allowed me to then build back up some self-confidence, some self-liking, and some trust, and some idea of a tool set I could apply that was not religious, that was not dogmatic, that was not from some authority figure. Carl Sagan didn't invent critical thinking, and he never claims to, right? So it's not like he's a guru. It's not what that's about. It's just, here are some things to help you think better. And that's informed every decision I've made since. or pretty much every decision I've made since. So that was what got me out of that void, that blackness. It was a lifeline for me, and that's why I talk about it in the way that I do. It was very important to me. It wasn't just an ancillary, secondary thing. And so I highly recommend that as a place to start, because it's where I started. I read a book called The Demon Haunted World, and it changed everything, because suddenly there wasn't any dogma or group that was going to solve my problems. I was going to solve my problems. And maybe I would get some help from some people along the way. And maybe that's how life is supposed to be lived versus this whole authoritarian model that I'd been under. So there you go.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think finding that new way of thinking and other people that think that way is huge. Yeah, thank you. I know for me a huge thing was passion, finding something that, because that's another thing too, is what, and I'm sure you're all aware where you're focused on the church. You're focused on religion. That's what you do. That's your life. And then you get out and you're like, wait, there's other things I really like to do. So for me, like a huge one was like illustrating, design, drawing, and granted, I got out before the pandemic, and so I was able to find a community that I could meet with weekly and find these people that had similar interests. And I think that having that weekly community that I could meet with that had nothing to do with religion or faith, but was about something I really loved, was absolutely huge. And I know we can't do that now, but there are similar things for online groups. If you get into some sort of art or some sort of reading, or if you really like movies, that is such a good way to meet with these people over like something that you just enjoy, and having that, like, it just grounds you. Like, it's something to hang on to when it gets really the earth starts trembling. I'd love to hear from Connie and Bonnie too about your experience with that. Bonnie, do you have anything that you, especially as with a family too, I'm sure that brought its extra challenges in that realm?
Yeah. Anything that sort of keeps me centered, focused, is that's
yeah, a new thing to ground yourself, that wasn't just because I think what this person is talking about is like, like with what the faith community, it's a lot of it is about like, hey, we've left something and we're able to and like, so we have the similarities in that, but like, what was something that gave you a new sense of identity, I guess would be another way to frame it.
I also, I think, followed that intellectual trail a little bit. I got very curious because I realized that I had been kept in the dark for such a long time. And that pissed me off, honestly. I was like in classes with other students, like in college, when I got out of the Seventh-day Adventist educational system and went to public college. I realized that they knew so many things that I had no clue about. And I got really angry with the adults in my life and the educators in my life for not having taught me these things, or at least exposed me to these things. So then I just became like voraciously curious. And I tried to find out everything that I could. This was really before we have I'm dating myself a little bit, but this is when you still had to go to the library instead of just Google things. So I would go.
Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Right. I would spend tons of time in the library just grabbing whatever resources I could find to learn and fill in those gaps of knowledge. And also realized that the thinking muscle was very underdeveloped, and I had to work on that as well. At first, I would check everything that I was reading with the voices of these external authorities. And I was always like, oh, wait a second, this sounds really awful. And rather than my pathway was, I had a little bit of rebelliousness in me at this time because of my anger at the institution and at the people who were responsible for helping me learn things. That rebelliousness led me to go like as far as I felt like going, even though I thought it was wrong and bad. I was like, I don't care. I'm going all the way. And now looking back on it, that was something I think that was part of my inner voice of resistance that needed to show itself so that I could actually have the courage that I needed to take those next steps and let what needed to be shattered actually shatter. Because that's the hardest thing about this, you know? You have to get really comfortable with that trembling. And when it starts rocking hard, it can be really tempting to jump back into what you thought was a more safe, or at least a more known space.
Yep.
And to get comfortable with that shaking until you realize, ooh, is this kind of a dance that I can do? Can be really challenging. So that's what I did. I found the inner rebel, and then I went out and discovered whatever I could about the world, and found out it was grounding. Who knew?
Yeah.
I'm totally cutting in right now, but I wanted to get this point in, and I think it's relevant to what Bonnie just said, and to what I was going over. And anyway, education. I really cannot stress that word enough. There's no way for me to underline it, highlight it, boldface it enough. There is nothing, I don't think, personally from myself and my experience with this, I don't think there's anything more important than the education I gave myself about my group, about cults, about belief, about the brain, about sociology, psychology, all of it. I have been deep in this stuff for years now, and with reason, because I needed to in order to understand this experience that happened to me, and how to live my life. And I did, and it, like you say, just so much information denied, just straight up not there. So you don't even know what you don't know. Like, it's not like you have some big grasp of how the world works when you come out of one of these groups. It's just the opposite. And there's so much to learn. So I cannot not stress that enough. And I wanted to get that in because I'm going to have to go in a second. But I wanted to give Bonnie her say without interrupting her. So I'm sorry that I had to cut in there.
Chris, before you go, is there anything else? I guess I'm thinking the time's ticking away and we've got some extra time. Is there anything else that's popping up on your screen? Is this okay if I ask him that, Ashton?
Oh, go for it, yeah.
I'd love to hear just anything else before you go on that.
Well, I can't. The other thing I wanted to stress really a lot was the certainty thing. I think we went over that, tied in with the identity. I mean, cults, groups, these things. It's all about identity, and it's about getting out of a culture. I mean, that's why we call them cults. It's a little culture, and it's got its own rules and it's got its own morals. I mean, there's moral reconfiguring you got to do. There's so much work to do when you come out of this thing, and it's just so one of the things that I adopted early on, so much so that it's the only thing I've ever tattooed onto my body, is this phrase: "It's chaos, be kind." And that's from Patton Oswalt, and that is advice to yourself first. And then it's advice for how to deal with other people, because some people don't deserve kindness, and they let themselves be known. And it's okay to kick those folks out. You don't have to tolerate everybody, and you shouldn't. It's kind of building up your own values and morals and stuff. So I think, I don't know, I can't really stress those things enough. I wish I had any kind of advice when I first got out, but I had to figure it all out from scratch. Mm-hmm. So these were the things I thought were important for my journey. I know that everybody's different, so I'm not putting these out there as universal principles, but certainly helped me a lot.
Yeah, no, that is precious advice.
Thanks for that, Bonnie.
Curious also, before you go too, I just want to make sure that we can, people can know where to find your work. And what you do.
Look me up. I have a YouTube channel. It's Chris Shelton. I identify as a critical thinker at large, not the ex-Scientologist at large. I put myself out there as a critical thinker, which means I am learning critical thinking and sharing what I'm learning as I'm going. I am on no pedestal on this subject at all. My background makes it very clear that I should be someone who is taken with a grain of salt, and that's totally fine with me. I want everybody to be taken with a grain of salt, actually. You know, that's kind of the thing. And so that's how I put myself out there. I have written a book about Scientology, which you can get on Amazon, which is not my memoir. It's an actual critical analysis of the subject. So if you're curious about that, you can check that out. It's called Scientology A to Xenu. That's my plug on that. But my YouTube channel pretty much has everything in terms of my content. And I have produced over these last many years hundreds of videos about Scientology and about cults. And I've interviewed therapists and exit counselors and people from other groups and destructive cults. So there's a ton of stuff there on recovery, and which I can't encapsulate easily in a couple minutes here. So there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing with us. I mean, that is, I know it's such a topic too, and I think Scientology especially is one of those cults that, like, even if you're not in it, it's so crazy that it is worth researching and watching his videos.
Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving. That's for sure. It does not have any bottom. It's and people who start going down that rabbit hole, man, they just it's fascinating.
Yeah. Well,
so
thank you so
all right,
much.
cool.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I'm gonna get going.
Perfect.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for doing this, guys. You guys are awesome.
Oh yeah. Hope you're awesome. Hope to have you on again soon.
Absolutely. Talk to you.
Bye. Also, kind of in this little intermission, want to give a little thanks to Carrie and the Church Lab, who we've been putting this on with. Carrie's been in the comments. They've been absolutely awesome, and the work they do is amazing. So if anybody watching or anybody is looking for I would look into them. Sorry about that. Got a little sidetracked. Please look into the Church Lab. They are in Austin, Texas, and doing some really amazing work. Also, quickly, just want to mention Alice and I made a free booklet. It's called What I Wish I Knew, and there's a link to it on the bottom of the page. Seriously, I would recommend this, especially if you know anybody who's a PMO, physically and mentally out. I think this would be huge for them, because it's just a compilation. We went to Allison. Sorry, I should not take credit for this. Allison did a lot of research and contacted a lot of people who have gotten out of ex-Witness, ex-Mormon, ex-Seventh-day Adventist, ex-Evangelical, and are in totally different places. And hey, like, what did you wish you knew when you were still in it? And so it's just a bunch. It's like real quick read, just a bunch of quotes. But putting it together it was a lot for me to kind of read through those and see what the people say. So I just want to let everybody know, because I do think it is could be a really valuable little tool. But with just a few, just a little bit of time left, I did want to talk to you two especially about Reconstruction, because I think we get so it's really easy to stay negative, I think, because we get caught on that of, well, this is all the things that's wrong with where I came from, and it's like the list is endless, and I'm curious for you guys what your experience has been reconstructing your relationship with faith and spirituality, and what that's kind of looked like for you. Connie, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to hear from you on the last question. Would you like to lead this off? And also, if you have something to say about the identity, we'd also really love to hear that, of course.
Ashton, you cut out. I heard Connie. We didn't get a chance. I think we're having
Sorry
a
about
connection here. That's all right. Go ahead. But I can hear you now.
Yeah, just wanted to go for you first on that question. We also didn't get a chance to hear from you on the identity. So if you had something you want to say on that, we'd love to hear that too.
Well, I think this all kind of ties together, I think. I hope we didn't lose Bonnie. Okay. Oh man, there's so many places to start with Reconstruction and faith and identity. for me, I had to, I really love what was said earlier about this whole, it's so funny, I'm having a hard time getting my thoughts together here. The whole intellect and the whole idea of, I've got to learn, I've got to retrain my mind. And I think that's part of what Bonnie and Chris were talking about, was this retraining, this I've got to look at this differently. I can't bring in the same mindset that I did, that I had, and we can't help it. But have that same mindset. Bonnie said something about, I'd say, I think, oh, what would all these other people in my past think about what I'm reading and thinking about right now? We're going to do that. We can't not. Our brain's wired to say, I shouldn't be reading this, or I shouldn't be exploring this. And so I think from a brain wiring standpoint, again, we just need to be gentle with ourselves to go, oh yeah, that's what our brains are going to do. We've been told to fear ideas outside of our construct. We've been told to fear those ideas for so long that our brains are going to struggle with that. But to say, wait, and I think fear is part of what I feel underneath these discussions. The fear of, I'm stepping outside of the boundaries. What if I am going down a path that is going to really destroy or hurt me, temporarily or eternally? I mean, the stakes are so high in these thought processes. So as much as possible to step away and say, I'm just going to breathe and kind of learn. And for me, I didn't do, mine was a little more gradual. I love how Chris just hit it, man. He's just, and I love Bonnie's rebellion. Mine was a little more subtle in that I just kept taking in a little bit more pieces at a time, just a little bit more, stretching the boundaries. And part of what I think I did identity-wise is, it's like I would take these ideas or concepts and I would almost like try them on and say, how do these fit? And how, that person said, I really like this. Well, actually, I kind of don't. I'm not into this. Okay, well, that's good to know. And taking and sorting. Again, I think it's going to come down to identity of, what do I want? What do I feel when I think about this amazing Buddhist concept? How does it resonate? And for me, it was like, oh my goodness, there's some beautiful stuff here, and then my brain would go, oh my gosh, what would people be thinking if they realized I was, really embracing some of these Buddhist ideas, and that, like, wait, take a breath, let go of some of the fear, so all of this process of just looking. For some people, it's very dramatic and quick. For me, it was slower. My deconstruction was weird. My deconstruction did not happen after my abuse. So this is part of my story, is I couldn't leave evangelicalism. After I went through that abuse, I had been so shattered to my core identity with this word, identity-wise. I literally think I would have broke leaving at that point, because I was an evangelical. That was my identity. And so to have my reputation so shattered, I hung in there for years after that. And really only about, years 11, 12 really started pulling away after the abuse, and really didn't complete the task until about year 18, and so it was a long, long journey for me. And a lot of it was just gently trying on and watching, how do I respond when I think of this concept or idea? How does this resonate for my own spirit? What do I want to open myself to that's different, that's creative, that's broader, that, and so I would just do these things, and I'd try some things and just go, no, not for me. And other things, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in love. This is amazing, So it was a sorting. Maybe that's a good word for me. It was a sort. My rebuilding was a lot of sorting. And I really, I'll be quiet here in a minute. But the one other thing I think about rebuilding that I think of all the time is the issue of a pendulum. And I felt myself do it, and I watch people do it all the time. We have to. And so we're stuck over here for a lifetime. And then when we say, I'm out, we go slam to the other side, whatever that other side is. We actually need that, again, I think, to build muscle. We need that to say, the deconstruction is not that. Oh, no, not that. And so everything in us says anything but. So we come over here, we slam, and we say, not that. That is a necessary, I think, essential part of the process for us to be reactive, to be rebellious, to, I love your story, Bonnie. It's like, and I think sometimes, especially as women, I think that is even more essential in a fundamentalist thing, is to say some bad words. No, and just to say, I'm doing my thing, and slam way over there. And so the perspective over here is they're all bad. They're all idiots. Everything they say is ridiculous. Everything about them I can't stand. It's triggering, and rightly so. And then we come over here and we've got to get some distance. What I try to help people understand through the process is that's essential. I watched myself do it and I could feel what it was, because I think I was old enough and was observant enough to go, wow, I'm really slamming hard. But then to realize, getting stuck over here, you replicate the same rigidity, the same narrow thought, the same fundamentalist thought, with a different packaging. And so when we do this slam, go for it. Slam over there and be like, hell no, no more. I can't say. And you've got to, for many reasons, you have to. But realize what's happening, that if you get stuck there, you replicate that fundamentalist thought. You replicate the narrow. I hope I'm making sense here, but I'm speaking more evangelical, just the thought process. But I watch conservatives come over here to the progressive side and get just as rigid, just as harsh and judgmental. And so to be able to go, eventually I'm going to need to breathe, and it's okay to be over here for quite a while, as long as you need to, and go, all right, how do I want to integrate the whole? How do I want to integrate who I am? What about those beautiful parts from that country church where I grew up that now I love? I'm like, oh, there's some beautiful stuff. But for a long time, I was like, ooh, yuck, that hurt me, because it did. That is part of the story. Part of it hurt me, and part of it was a gift to me. I know what community is because of that sweet country church I grew up in. I innately get community. What a gift. But it took me a long time to come back and go, yes, I want to bring this part with me. And I want to say no to the rest. And I want to say, yeah, I got a bunch of new stuff over here that I'm integrating. So I just talked a lot here, but I think that to me is a really core part of reconstruction that I think I don't hear talked about a lot. And it feels really important. They're getting not to judge yourself in the process. If you're slammed over here, good. It's where you need to be. And to say, all right, how with this process, and by the way, we can go back and forth in our lifetimes in different ways. And so, and just go, oh, look where looky here. There's the pendulum. So, all right, enough said, but I'm seeing you nodding, you guys. So hopefully you're tracking with me.
It's that topic. I could listen to you talk about that for a long time. That is some really good insights. I think for me, I think the only difference, I think for some people, if it's not like the religion I came from wasn't a part of like the spectrum in a way, it was like this kind of outlier, and so then I hopped onto the pendulum and just slammed back and forth for a little bit.
Yes. And I would love to hear Chris's perspective. I was thinking about this idea with his story, thinking, ooh, that would have sorted itself out in a different way, I think. So I can only talk from my story in this regard. This is my framework. It's who I've been. But I love to hear, because there again, I'm representing only a certain section of people listening and who go through this. So
yeah. How about you, Bonnie?
Yeah, thank you for that, Connie. That was really a lot of wisdom and insight in what you said. I used to identify like really passionately as an ex Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah.
And then I realized that, that's still putting me in a pretty like rigid relationship with Seventh-day Adventism.
Totally.
Using that term X, so my identity is still entirely wrapped up into that system that I say I'm so not okay with. And then, the process, I did begin to question that. And that question led me to that integrative process that I think Connie like referred to so eloquently, where I really do feel in many ways like a new being, a new person, because of integrating I call Seventh-day Adventism an ethnicity. It's a folk culture, and there's a lot of bad stuff in it, but there's also some things that I have chosen to bring with me into my newfound spirituality, which really does feel it feels new. It feels new. It feels creative. It feels more real, I guess. It's hard to put language to it. But I think it's not so much like deconstruction and then reconstruction or rebuilding. It's more like, okay, how do I become a really whole person? And that wholeness was denied me, which is why I had to leave. I don't know about anyone else who's listening, but my experience was not that leaving was a choice. It felt like I was being sort of lured. I was on a path and I was being like drawn out. I didn't have the same, I'm normative in so many ways. Like I'm not normative, but I was like in that dominant, I'm white. I am, middle class. I have a certain level of education. I am heterosexual, like all these things that I wasn't forced. I'm like the poster child for what you're supposed to be within the system, So I wasn't forced out in the ways that so many people experience being forced out because they didn't fit the particular boxes that they were supposed to fit. I was drawn out in some kind of like in a spiritual sort of way. So I didn't experience it as choice, and I just kept going. Until I realized, oh wow, I have all this in my rearview mirror. And what does that mean now? So I think that's where I'll leave it for the moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Carrie just said what I was thinking. The whole person and being drawn. Oh, so much. I felt like, I don't know whether drawn would be my word. I felt like there were many times I thought, I don't want to leave. I do not want to leave. This is my home. This is my life. This is my identity. And yet when I would say, okay, I'm heading back, all I can say is it felt like death. I couldn't, it would be my whole soul withering. It could not, it was death to my spirit. And so I was like, in some ways I felt forced out by my own, I can't go back. It's going to kill me. And there was so much grief with that. I know a lot of people, and I kind of envy them. And there's probably many of you listening who are like, I'm just glad I'm out of there. I am so glad I'm gone. Woohoo. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad, because I wish I could have felt that way. It was truly devastating grief. And yet to be whole and to be true, I could not with integrity go back. I couldn't start back into it. I'm like, I am on a path, and to violate this is violating me. And that's what I got to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think well that's definitely the going back question that like exists inside the brain. I feel like is
Right.
so hard because it's like for me personally, I was forced out, um, and which was like an interesting thing. And like going back for witnesses is like a year long process of being a hermit, where it's like witnesses obviously aren't talking because they're shunning you, and also like if the elders find out that you're like talking to worldly people, um, then they'll like reset your kind of time, like how long it's gonna take.
Wow.
Um, and so I tried doing that for a bit, but then it was this weird thing of like once I got kicked out because what happened was like more of a political, like internal political thing. Um, it was like this armor broke around me, and it was this like this armor had been existing instead of myself, and I was finally like actually human. I was like super like squishy and like I could only lift 2 pounds kinds of thing, but uh, I was like, oh, I'm actually myself now, and like how do I exist? And I think what you said about being whole really reminded me. I was talking to one person that helped me kind of realize it, where it's like sometimes I go back to that like armor around me that broke, and I like find a piece. I'm like, you know what? This is actually like a good piece. And I'll like put that onto who I am now, and like keep that with me because I appreciated it. And I think that is an interesting thing of like as you progress and feel more comfortable in your life, to be able to go back, which is like the scariest thing. But like in your mind, go back to who that was and be like, oh, what? Maybe it wasn't all bad. Like there's some things that definitely like I can't go back to, but there's also some parts that like can be useful.
In human development, Ashton, I often relate it to this. As a child, we love our family, and it's the only thing we know. We think at least most of us love our family, or at least think we should. And then we become adolescents, and we go, my family sucks. They are ridiculous. And you get into your 20s, and you're like, they are so dysfunctional. How could I even come from them? Oh my gosh. And then it's usually developmentally about 25 to 30. All of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm really talking to a lot of people whose families were really crappy. Wow. Maybe my family gave me some good things. And it's almost, I think, spiritually sometimes like a human development cycle where you go through and you have to. Teenagers and young adults, that is a developmentally appropriate and essential thing to go, my family is stupid. I'm out, man. They are ridiculous. They don't know what they're talking about. That is actually really developmentally appropriate. I told myself that as a mom when my kids did that. So it's like, no, this is developmentally appropriate because it is. But then I think maturity dictates that we start integrating and we start saying, what is a realistic view of my family? And I'm not going to idealize it. And it's not going to be the angel. It's not going to be the devil. It's like, it's going to be a real thing that is a mixed bag, just like humans. And so I guess I say that to say, if you are feeling adolescent right now, good, that's appropriate. That's appropriate. Don't judge yourself. It's just to say, all right, I want to keep growing here. I need to stay here as long as I need to stay here and really sort out what wasn't okay about that family or that religious institution, because you got to sort it out. It's essential. And then I think there's just to say, you don't have to stay there. With time and years, and I think this is much more years than weeks or months in this process, much, much more years in the spiritual reconstruction, decades maybe, and you just can feel, I guess the integration is the word I keep coming back to. You watch a 35-year-old talk about their family, if they've developmentally gone, kept maturing, and they usually have a pretty realistic view of what it was about. So.
Definitely.
Yeah, I hear sometimes people talk to me, and I work with quite a few groups of folks who are going through this process of deconstructing, and often I'll hear things like, well, I don't want to be bitter. They'll say, I don't want to be bitter. And I get that. And yet bitterness is part of it. It doesn't mean that you stay there, though. So I think, yeah, Connie, is exactly what you say, is that there is no stopping point ever. So I think as long as we begin to, and it's hard when we've been given the destination and it's so clear cut and we know our mission. I mean, we use those words, right? And we know exactly where we're headed. We know we have everything. The script is written for us, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then to move from that into, wow, the future is unknown. It's always an adventure, and there's no such thing as a stopping place. Yeah. That then all of a sudden there's a little shift, I think, that happens, and then then the integration doesn't feel quite so like when we're teenagers, we feel like if we incorporate anything of our parents, we're somehow losing something of ourselves.
Right.
Now it feels more like, well, maybe this was useful and I can wrap it into this new thing that I'm about.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I think from what I've noticed, recently it's been this thing of like everything it's in both sides of my family are like completely different. My mom's side, and I see this, and I think it happens with multiple faiths. It's like that's where I had the multi-generational, like I was like fifth generation witness, I think.
Wow.
Fourth or fifth.
Wow.
And their side, I really think that being a part of that faith kind of took the family downhill and stuff. Just like, especially with witnesses that don't get higher education at all, and so just like a lack of higher education as time goes on, I think is very destructive. But then I look at my dad's side and I see like really beautiful people, and like whenever I notice I do something that reminds me of like one of them, I'm like, oh my goodness, I like hang on to that even more, because it's like such as it's like oh, like I feel like a root, like I just grew another root, which is, I think when people leave, that's the hardest thing, I think, is when you, or not the hardest thing, everything's the hardest thing, but when you leave a faith or shift of faith, you feel like you have no roots.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you guys, what's kind of been some of your ways of building roots, or like, I guess navigating your own roots and what you can offer through that. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess to me, it's a little along what we've been talking about. I think sometimes, just like an adolescent who says, I am not like my family, I am not like those crazy people over there, there's a point at which, and their adolescent is fine, but they're rejecting part of themselves. They're severing off part of their identity. I may not have wanted to be raised in the fundamentalist thought that I was, and I don't like the destruction it's done to me at multiple levels. But I also want to be able to kindly embrace that part of me because it's there. I can't get rid of it. I can't change. I can't rewire my brain with a snap of the fingers just saying, well, I don't like that idea anymore. It's still there. It's still part of me. Now, what I can do throughout my lifetime is to allow it to transform me and to change some of those neural pathways that I don't like, that my reflexive thinking that I still have. Then I can go, oh yeah, I don't necessarily want to do that, and I have that choice. But I think sometimes it's especially in deconstruction, we just want to sever that whole identity. And it's like, oh, it's the roots. It's like they're still there. And I think, back to the pendulum, I'm a big proponent for, my clients would tell you, I talk about black and white thinking all the time and saying, wow, black and white thinking is part of what got you here. And now you're applying it again in this new way that's also not going to be helpful to you. My history and my roots are gray. They are a mixed bag. And I can't not. That is reality. I can't change that. And so I think embracing that and saying, yeah, they were many shades of gray. There was very little white, and only a bit, and some black. A lot of it was just dark gray, or some of it was pretty light gray. And that variance, and to just be able to hold, we don't hold in Western culture, we don't hold two things that look opposed very often. We don't say, it gave me beautiful things and it really hurt me, and hold both of those. We struggle with that, and I think that is part of the process, is to accept those gray roots, so to speak, the mixed roots, and then we can work to bring more light, or whatever, all nothing thinking. We can work toward that in our own hearts and spirits and neurology, all of that. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think that's something
super helpful. Yeah. Thanks. Did you have any I mean, I'm sure you guys we've all been dealt with that. I mean, what roots, I guess, for you, Bonnie, have you enjoyed?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about my own kids who were like 7 and 10-ish when we said one morning, hey, guess what? We're not going to think like this anymore.
Wow.
So that's like right in the middle, developmentally speaking, of a time where spirituality, having a sense of identity, having a sense of community is all so important for their own sense of well-being and structure and security and all those things that they would need to be able to grow up, as grounded humans.
Yeah.
So we were in that pendulum swing, and I mean, we, meaning Rajiv and I, my partner and I, while we were raising kids.
Yeah.
And so we ripped the roots out from under ourselves and from under them, swung way over into like, none of what we told you was true. So now we're going to find all these other things that we can now embrace because we no longer believe that anymore. And then they became young adults. And then they're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And in a way, having kids, for those of you who are parents out there, you realize that when you look at your kids, you often see yourself reflected back. And sometimes it's not the most, it's not the best sides of yourself, but it's a huge gift to be reflected back on and to learn from. And I think what I learned about integration from being a parent.
Yeah. Yes.
Because my young adult sons were able to say, you wanted us to throw away things that were actually really helpful and useful to us at particular stages of our life and our development. And I had to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also I found myself in seminary, like in my late 30s, in part because I wanted a very progressive Christian seminary, because I wanted to sort of make peace with this Bible thing and with, all of these teachings I've been taught. I wanted to fight with it, actually, on the other side.
Yeah.
And in going to seminary, a progressive Christian seminary, I met people who grew up without any tradition, who grew up sort of, their parents were just always like, whatever, I'm not sure what happens when you die. I'm not sure. I don't have any answers for you. Nobody has any answers. And they were told that at 3 years old, and they were told that at 5 years old. And they said they envied me. They envied my fundamentalist background. And they said, at least you have something to push against. I have no frameworks. I have no spiritual frameworks or religious frameworks to work with. And I was like, that's really not what I expected to hear. But it did cause me to wonder and to question. And it caused me to value that, even some of the icky parts, because it did give me something to push against in a way that allowed me to form as a whole person. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's That's been part of my story up to this point anyway.
Makes a lot of sense. I love that. Yeah. And that's where I guess, you know, this whole idea that everything belongs is really part of my story at this point, you know, and that's where I go, I don't want to sever those parts of me that I don't, again, there are things I'm like, no, that will never be okay with me ever. And so I'm not going soft on that. I'm an advocate, you know, for spiritual abuse survivors and stuff. But in terms of my own journey, to say it all belongs, even if it's to push up against and fight with, and you know, and sometimes that takes decades to say, oh, that actually transformed me in a way that I really deeply value, but it was something really horrible and that should have never been there. And
right,
so you know, I think that's
and both can be true, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Man, you two, thank you so much. That I mean, I feel like we just made so much progress and like bringing so many ideas together, and I am so glad that you two chose to be on this event. I think to wrap it up, I just first want to ask if there's any extra or any point that you would want to kind of leave people with. To go to both of you if you had any extra point to bring up, and then also I really want people to know where they can find the work that you're doing, because I think both of you do really important stuff and it would really help people out a lot.
I think Bonnie already said my. Oh, what's that?
Oh, sorry, no, I'm nothing.
That's right. I think Bonnie already said mine, and I think my final words are trust yourself. Trust yourself in this process. I think. And it's okay if you can't do it very well right now. It can be learned. And so that's probably my, you know, Bonnie just said it beautifully early on. And I think that's the guiding force. That's where we have to live our life and walk our path. So trust that.
Yeah. So. I love that.
Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Because it does no matter what.
Yeah, not that you have to, and stop when you need to.
Yes. And I was going to say, not that you have a choice. Sometimes there are times I'd like to quit, but no, I think it's well said. Well said.
Yeah.
You can find me at Connie A. Baker. I can put this here in the comment section.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
ConnieABaker.com, and all my resources are there. I have a group. I have a religious abuse recovery group that is going gangbusters and doing great. It's really shockingly a pretty safe place. I've put some pretty clear guidelines around it for that very reason. And of course, my book, but you guys can find all that on my website. Let's see. I hope that's the right one. Yes, that's the right one. So you can find me there, and book, group, all kinds of videos, stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can find me. I'm involved in a couple projects. A podcast co-host on Reconstruct.com, which is a progressive Christian podcast. So those of you who are exploring progressive Christianity. And I'm on Facebook as Reverend Bonnie Lang Rambob. Maybe I should put that in. And at Parkside Community Church in Sacramento. It's every time I say that I'm actually working at a church, I have to laugh a little bit.
Yeah, that is. I couldn't imagine myself working in a church, and so I can't imagine just the realization of that. Perfect. Great, and then it was also great having Rajiv in the comments too. He was able to share some links and stuff there, which was awesome.
Yeah,
great. You guys are amazing and do great stuff. And it was great getting to connect with you, Connie. Yes. Super happy. It's something I've definitely been wanting to do. So it was so amazing having both of you on. I mean, the stuff we talked about is stuff that I needed to hear nowadays, and if I had just gotten out, would really want to hear. And so I really appreciate it, you guys. It's been awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Hope to
Thank
talk to
you,
soon.
Ashton. Yes, thank you for this opportunity and for the work that you and Allison do.
Yeah,
Yes.
and also huge shout out to Allison. She is the one I like to talk and make designs and illustration, make pretty little things. She is the one who puts together the engine of getting this together, promoting it, finding the perfect people to be on it. She is really the genius of the operation. So
You're a
we
great
wouldn't be
team.
doing this without her.
Yes. Great team. Yeah, privileged to be here. And I'm sitting there as we sign off thinking of all the people listening. And I just wish I could give every one of you a hug and look you in the eye and be able to say, you're going to make it. You're going to find your way. And anyway, so I love all the talk along the sides. And I keep thinking, on the chat and thinking of all the people who are just listening who are like too worried to even put themselves out there. So anyway, I see you.
We're cheering you on.
Yes.
Yeah. Seriously. Well, thank you guys. I can't wait to keep in touch with you guys and do some more fun stuff. Great.
Sounds good. Thank you.
See ya.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.